Veteran. My sister screamed in court, but when I slid a paper onto the judge's desk, he said, "Lock the doors. No one leaves this room." Dad turned away. Mom trembled and my sister froze. She's just homeless. You know that feeling when your entire world just shatters in a single, gut-wrenching moment? I'd served my country for 25 years, faced things most people can only imagine, but nothing prepared me for the day I came home to find my own sister calling the cops on me, claiming I was a stranger trying to break into the house I grew up in. What the hell happened? I stepped out of that taxi, fully uniform, still crisp, duffel bag heavy in my hand, and a heart weighed down by 25 years of silence. Before my foot even hit the porch, my sister, Claire, was already on the phone. To the police. The late September air was cool, thick with the smell of damp leaves, clinging to my skin. I paused at the iron gate, the one that had always welcomed me, the one that now felt like a prison. A security camera above buzzed, tilting, almost as if it recognized me, but the gate stayed locked. No click. No welcome. I pressed the intercom. A sharp buzz, then nothing. Tried again. "Claire!" My voice cracked, rusty from disuse. "It's me." The front door opened. Claire emerged, sharp in a tailored blazer, every inch the estate's gatekeeper. Her phone was still at her ear. "I'm calling the police," she said. Her eyes narrowed, like I was some kind of threat. "There's someone trying to enter the property. Claims to be family." The shock literally punched the air from my lungs. "Claire, what are you doing?" I choked out. Her response was chilling. "This isn't your home anymore. You've been gone for decades, Naomi. Don't show up here dressed like that expecting something." My grip tightened on the duffel bag. I just got discharged. I thought I'd see Mom, maybe Dad. She scoffed. "You should have thought of them before disappearing for 25 years. We moved on. You're not in the will. You're not even on the deed." Those words hit harder than any combat report I'd ever filed. "I grew up in this house," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I pointed to the sycamore scraping the attic window. "That tree. I broke my arm climbing it. I bled into the carpet you probably replaced." Claire's jaw clenched. "You always made everything about you. You think a uniform earns you the right to just show up and expect a hero's welcome." Then, with agonizing slowness, a police cruiser turned onto the street, blue lights flashing, no siren. My gut twisted. 2 officers stepped out. The older one paused, eyes widening slightly when he saw me. "Naomi Hale?" he asked. "Ma'am, you just got out. Pentagon certified Lieutenant Colonel, Cyber Command." I swallowed. "This is my parents' house." The younger officer glanced at Claire, who folded her arms triumphantly. "This property belongs to Claire Bennett and Richard Hale. There's no legal record of Naomi Hale holding ownership or rights of residence." My mouth opened, closed. "Wait, Richard Hale, my father? He's still here." Claire's face remained carved from stone. "He moved in after selling the house we grew up in. This was Grandpa's. I renovated it. Legally." "I don't care about legal," I whispered. "I care that it was home." The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, unless you have identification proving this is your residence, we're going to have to ask you to leave." My hands trembled as I fumbled for my discharge papers, but I knew they didn't matter. I took a step back, then another, until my boots met the edge of the sidewalk. I hadn't cried when they took my medals. I hadn't cried when I coded in a hospital tent in Bahrain. But I cried now, because a place that had shaped me refused to recognize me. My phone buzzed. A message from Ma'am. No name. Just, "You should return to base. There's nothing here for you." I let the phone drop. Through the fog of my tears, I looked up past the window. A figure sat in the living room. My father. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even glance at me. I slept in my car that night, staring at the dark outline of the home that should have been mine. By morning, a for sale sign was already posted on the lawn. My eyes refused to close. Every creak of the wind, every flicker of the porch light, every memory clinging to that silhouette kept me locked in place. My heart pounded with a rhythm I hadn't felt since my early deployments. That was supposed to be my safe place, my inheritance, my anchor. Now it was a battleground. Blurry-eyed and bone-tired, I pulled into a small cafe the next morning. Ruth Clean was already there. Pressed slacks, dark blazer, a sharp contrast to my faded uniform and etched exhaustion. We hadn't seen each other since undergrad, but she looked at me like no time had passed. That alone almost made me cry. "I saw the listing this morning," she said, without greeting, flipping her tablet toward me. There it was, my home, listed under Raven Holdings LLC. Raven Holdings? I stared at the screen. She nodded grimly. "And here's the kicker. 3 months ago, There was a property transfer recorded here. She passed over a printout. My name was on the seller line. Except that wasn't my signature, I said flatly, a cold pressure building behind my eyes. That's forged. I've never signed anything related to selling that house. I figured, Ruth said, pulling up another document. This one's from a local notary, witnessed and stamped by a guy who was under review last year for falsifying DMV affidavits. I'll subpoena him. I shook my head in disbelief. So they sold their house, and now they're laundering through mine? Her brows arched. What? I took a breath. 3 months ago, they moved out of their old house. Said it was time for a fresh start. They showed up here. Claire said it made more sense to consolidate family assets. My parents, Mom especially, made a big deal about how sentimental the old house was. But I didn't think they meant this house. Ruth nodded slowly. They probably used Raven Holdings as a buffer to avoid legal exposure. Whoever's behind that company, I bet your sister's husband is involved. My stomach turned. Brian. Ruth looked grim. He works in international logistics, doesn't he? Yes. And they're storing supplies in the basement. I blinked. What? She pointed to a note in her file. City utilities show a spike in energy consumption at the property, like something's being refrigerated, but no permit for renovation or commercial usage has been filed. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. An email from my mother. I didn't want to read it, but I did. Naomi, this is not betrayal. It's practicality. You never lived here. We did. And you're never around. Love, Mom. It hit harder than I expected, like she was justifying theft with maternal indifference. I need access to that house, I murmured. Not just to take it back. I want to know what's inside. Ruth hesitated. That could be dangerous, Naomi. If they're using the house for something illegal. I'm not walking away. She nodded once. Then we'll start with a forensic document analyst. I'll file for an injunction to freeze the title. And Naomi. What? You'll need to be careful. People who forge deeds and commit fraud aren't afraid to cross legal lines. The rest of the day passed in intense calls and quiet meetings. I returned to my car late that evening, unsure whether I was more angry or numb. I parked down the block, determined to stay close to watch. The air was still warm, sticky, like Virginia hadn't accepted fall yet. I noticed the man standing across the street just after 1:45 a.m. He didn't look at me, but he lingered near the corner lamp post. When he left, I thought nothing of it, until I saw a slip of paper wedged under my windshield wiper. It wasn't folded, just pressed flat, like a warning or a test. If you're the real Naomi, meet me at Alley 7, 11 p.m. Come alone. I stared down the block at the winding path that led behind the old bakery. I had 10 minutes. I didn't hesitate. They said you were mentally unstable after combat, the neighbor whispered, his voice low, sharp with urgency. But I've seen the way your sister's husband brings men here at night. His name was Ethan, mid-40s, weathered face, a former Marine-turned-mechanic. We stood in the shadow of an old street lamp, at the edge of the alley behind what was once my grandfather's home. A chain-link fence separated us from the warehouse, now a storage shed. They say you're dangerous, Naomi, he muttered. But if you ask me, dangerous is what's going on in that building. My fingers curled around the edge of my jacket where a small recording device sat in the inner pocket. I scanned the alley. No security cameras, no eyes, but too quiet. What do you mean? I asked. I've seen men unloading crates from black vans. License plates vanish before they pull up. They don't stay long. Your sister's husband. He's there every week, always with gloves on. Never a word to the neighbors. I remember the last thing Brian ever said to me, the day of my grandfather's funeral. You should stick to places with guns, Lieutenant. This isn't your terrain anymore. That smug tone, the contempt. Maybe he was right, but I knew how to watch, how to wait. That night, I returned to the alley alone, dressed in black, camera clipped to my collar, recorder live. I crouched behind the half-burnt fence near the back lot. Midnight came with a low rumble of engines. 2 black trucks rolled in without headlights. I held my breath. 4 men stepped out, one clearly armed. The other wore a cap pulled low and carried a clipboard. Then came Brian. His gait was confident, relaxed, like this was just another Tuesday night. He didn't speak much, just pointed toward the rear door of the house. The group moved with practiced ease. Boxes unloaded, hands gloved, everything efficient. Ruth was right. This wasn't just squatting. This was organized. Then something unexpected happened. Brian stepped inside the old warehouse. I crept closer, careful not to trigger the loose gravel underfoot. I positioned the small audio recorder near a cracked vent, its mic angled toward the loading area from inside. Voices filtered through, muffled, but then one cut through, sharper than the rest. If that officer girl finds out, sever the tie, no warning. I froze. The voice was familiar, gravelly, deliberate. My father. My throat tightened. I replayed it in my head just to be sure. That deep Virginia accent, that phrasing. I hadn't heard him speak directly to me in years, and now I heard him planning my erasure. I withdrew slowly, slipping behind the fence, hands shaking. I clutched the recording device like it might burn through my palm. Back in my car, I played the audio again, scrubbed it carefully, listening for every syllable. The voices were vague, except his. That one line. It played over and over in my head. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I circled the block again and returned to the alley. But when I reached the vent, my recorder was gone. Someone had been there. Someone new. Panic flooded my gut, thick and metallic. My cover was slipping. I needed to move fast before the window slammed shut. I drove to a nearby diner to regroup, heart hammering. I wasn't even halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message read, "You're playing with fire. I have your military psych report. Want to see what it says about you?" My father met me in a parking lot. He didn't hug me. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just stood next to his navy blue sedan, crisp jacket zipped to the collar, hat pulled low as if shielding himself from recognition. But it wasn't the rain he feared. It was me. I recognized the distance in his eyes, the stiffness in his posture. He'd practiced this meeting, prepared for it like a business transaction. Cold, clean, efficient. I stopped 2 steps away. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't flinch. "You came back different." I swallowed. I served this country for 25 years. And in those 25 years, you became someone I don't recognize. The sentence hit like a rifle shot. I had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways, him saying he was proud, even quietly acknowledging the work I'd done. I had never imagined indifference. "I want the truth about the house," I said, voice low but sharp. "You knew what Grandpa left me. You witnessed the signing." He shifted his weight. That document was outdated. Circumstances changed. Enough to forge my name? Enough to hide it under a shell company. I stepped closer. "I have audio." That got him. His jaw tensed, eyes narrowing, but still he wouldn't look directly at me. "I heard your voice. You said if I found out you'd cut the tie." He finally turned toward me, his eyes colder than I remembered. "I meant what I said. We've tried to protect the family name. Your return jeopardizes everything we've built. Your sister is part of a respected enterprise. And I live in a car because you sold my home." He didn't answer, just glanced toward the black SUV parked across the lot. "I'm not ashamed of what I've done," I said. "But you are of me. That's what this is really about." He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs like brushing off dirt. "You're not one of us anymore." The words didn't echo. They landed and stayed. He turned, walked to the SUV, and the driver stepped out to open the door. I recognized the man immediately, the same one who'd helped unload boxes at the warehouse. Bald head, silver watch, always silent. They drove off without another word. I stood alone in the rain. It started as a drizzle, then turned heavier, soaking through my sleeves, my collar, my soul. There was no reconciliation waiting in this story, just truth. And that was colder than anything I'd faced in uniform. I walked back to my car, chest tight, throat burning with every breath. A silent argument I couldn't win. I didn't cry, but I did find an envelope wedged beneath my windshield wiper. It wasn't official, just a plain manila sleeve sealed with tape. I got in, turned on the cabin light, and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a photocopy of my grandfather's original will. My name, the property address, all unaltered. The signature dates matched the copy I had stored in an encrypted archive years ago. No transfer clause, no sale condition. It was airtight. A handwritten note was stapled to the top. I notarized this document that day. I know they falsified it later. "Ms. Lewis." I stared at it, heart pounding. Proof. The first crack in their narrative. I scanned it again, then snapped a picture and texted it to Ruth with a single line. "This changes everything." I sat in the corner of my temporary rental. Bare mattress. One chair, no curtains, lit only by the blue glow of my laptop. Outside, the night wind rattled loose siding. Inside, my stomach churned as I stared at the report Isaac had just sent over. I'd reached out hours earlier, forwarding the original deed and the scanned will, along with the corporate trail Ruth had begun unearthing. He'd responded almost instantly. "I remember Raven Holdings," he wrote. "We flagged them as a front company during a 2012 counterintel probe, laundering false contracting dark money, but we were told to stand down. Case was sealed. Now, The name Brian Keene was staring back at me, listed under Consultant Logistics, in the appendix of that same file. I froze. Claire had always insisted Brian save the family from collapse. Asterisk, he rebuilt Dad's business. Without him, we'd have lost everything. Asterisk, no wonder she protected him so fiercely. But rebuilt with what? Dirty money. I opened the next PDF from Ruth. Transaction records tied to the shell companies leasing the warehouse. She traced them to 3 entities, each registered in Nevada under different names, but the money flowed to one destination, Claire's private account. Over $500,000 transferred in the past 18 months. I clenched my jaw and pulled up the leasing contract. Found the name of the property manager. I didn't need to read past the first line. My father's signature, bold and slanted, was right there. Land use supervisor. He had signed off on it. So, they were all in it. All 3 of them. I ran a background index on Raven Holdings through the private intel portal Isaac still had access to. The tags were damning. Classified contractor cover. Suspected financial funnel. Domestic asset misappropriation. Isaac pinged again. You sure you're ready for this? If you move, they'll hit back. I replied without hesitation. I'm not backing off. I'm not just fighting for a house. I'm fighting to expose what they've done and who they're still hurting. I called Ruth. She picked up immediately. I have the contractor names, the bank routing, the signed lease. Everything links, and the forgery matches. My signature was copied from a tax return in 2017, notarized by a woman who hasn't been licensed since 2020. I already verified. Ruth was silent a moment. Then we file. Fraud, criminal conspiracy, real estate title tampering, possibly federal racketeering. If the Raven Holdings connection holds, it holds. For the first time since I'd returned, I felt grounded. Not angry, not broken, just focused. They erased me, I said. But now I found them. On paper, in crime files and signatures. They forgot to hide. My inbox chimed. A leak. Subject. Urgent. She's investigating. It was an internal email sent between 2 Raven Holdings addresses. Someone had forwarded it anonymously. She started connecting the dots. Clean house before the 16th lock, down the CLA accounts. The Hale girl is persistent. I read it twice. They knew. They were already trying to erase the trail again. I stood at the gate again, this time in uniform, decorated with honors. But beside me was someone more powerful than medals, my lawyer. Ruth adjusted the strap of her leather case as we waited at the counter inside Fairfax Town Hall. Sunlight poured through the high windows, but the tension between us and the property office clerk was thick as cement. The clerk tapped her keyboard, eyes darting across the screen. This deed is active, she said almost too casually. Ruth didn't flinch. That's precisely why we're here. We're filing a petition for immediate injunction on all transfers based on compelling evidence of forgery and fraud. I slid forward the folder Ruth had prepared. Detailed analysis of a signature inconsistencies, the timeline of the false notary, and the suspicious account trails. At the top of the stack sat the verified original deed from my grandfather's will. The woman's eyes widened. She looked at Ruth, then at me. Lieutenant Colonel Hale, I said softly, retired. I grew up in that house. By noon, we had a stamp confirmation. The land office had enacted a temporary hold on all transactions related to the property, pending further investigation. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. A line in the sand. The drive to the house felt surreal. This time, we didn't park across the street or lurk in shadows. We pulled straight into the driveway. Claire's Lexus was already there. Brian's truck, too. Ruth adjusted her jacket, pulled out the official envelope with the injunction, and handed it to me. Let's give it to her together. I rang the bell. Claire answered, her lips already curled into that polished, performative smile, until she saw my uniform. Then she saw Ruth. The color drained from her face. We're here to serve you with a court injunction, Ruth said crisply, handing over the envelope. Effective immediately. Any transfer, lease, or modification of the property is suspended. You've been notified. Claire's hands trembled as she took the papers. What is this? Some kind of joke, she hissed. Brian appeared behind her, slow and deliberate. You really want to go this route, Naomi, he said, his voice like gravel soaked in oil. You don't know who you're fighting. I met his gaze, calm, controlled. I used to work internal investigations at the Pentagon, I said. I've seen men like you. Watch them bluff, threaten, then fold. His eyes narrowed. For a flicker, just a breath, I saw it fear. Not of me. Maybe, but of something unraveling. Claire sputtered. You can't do this. You're not even the rightful owner. Ruth cut in. That's what we intend to prove in court. Brian stepped forward. This is harassment. You're harassing my family. Ruth gave him a hard look. And fraud is a felony. We turned and left. The slam of the door behind us was louder than I expected, like a final act in a play that had gone on too long. In the car, Ruth glanced over at me. They'll hit back, Naomi. You ready? They will strike back. Are you ready? Ruth had asked. What they didn't know was that I had access to tools they couldn't imagine, digital forensics, chain of custody metadata, and a few friends who owed me favors. The soft hum of my laptop filled the silent apartment as I leaned over a second monitor, eyes tracing digital breadcrumbs, left behind by people who thought they were smarter than the system. The glow of the screen lit the stacks of documents on my kitchen counter, overlapping in an organized chaos only I could decipher. It was nearing midnight. I hadn't slept properly in days, but sleep didn't matter. Not when I was this close. I clicked into the secure Zoom room. Isaac appeared first. Tired eyes, Marine Corps cap still on despite the hour. Then Kayla popped in. She'd always preferred anonymity, a blurred background, and her voice modulated just enough to avoid AI tracing. I got your packet, Kayla said without preamble. Encrypted, well, but let's see what the liars left behind. I uploaded a zip file of PDF screenshots and one particularly shady wire transfer receipt. Kayla whistled. Someone's been busy laundering money. Follow the IP, I said. That's all I need. She started parsing headers, running scripts, fingers tapping like a symphony of exposure. Meanwhile, Isaac leaned closer to the camera. I ran that company name you sent me, Mari Tech Solutions. You're not going to like this. He uploaded a redacted report from a Defense Department internal archive. Back in 2016, Mari Tech bid on a supply contract, camo gear and radio parts. They submitted forged compliance reports. Case got sealed when someone upstairs pulled strings. Let me guess, I said flatly. No conviction, no penalty. Correct. But guess whose name shows up on the board of directors? Brian Aitmore. I stared at the name. All this time, Claire said he was the one who kept the family stable. She never said how. Kayla interrupted. I isolated a digital signature from that financial transfer you sent. The VPN they used isn't clean. Most amateurs assume they're safe, but there's a DNS leak. That IP traces back to a residential modem, Fairfax area, registered to Claire Hale. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. So, they're funneling money from the house. Exactly, Kayla added. And get this. One of the purchase orders routed through Mariteca's system matches a lot number tied to a surveillance drone batch we flagged years ago during your deployment. You were still in the Gulf then, right? My mind flashed back. That case never resolved. Half the gear vanished after audit. Someone covered it. Now, it felt like the ghosts of my past were reaching through the timeline, converging right here, right now. I want a chain of evidence, I said. Every login, every IP, every transaction they touched. This isn't just fraud. It's military misappropriation. Isaac nodded. I'll pull DoD procurement cross-references. This could trigger federal review if it hits the right ears. Kayla's screen flickered. Her face sharpened with tension. Naomi, she said carefully. Your inbox was accessed at 8:42 p.m. from an unfamiliar device. I froze. Are you saying I've been hacked? I'm saying someone's trying to cover their tracks, and you just lit up their radar. Kayla warned me. They're scanning your location again. Someone breached your email tonight. The letter came in a plain envelope, a cease and desist. But I had already mailed my report to the office of the Inspector General. It was thin, too thin to contain the weight of the guilt they carried, but it screamed desperation. The envelope sat on my kitchen table next to a steaming mug of black coffee. Its neatly typed return address, sterile and smug, Raven Holdings Legal Affairs. I didn't even bother opening it. Instead, I turned back to the envelope I had dropped off yesterday morning. Priority mail, certified, signed upon delivery. Inside were copies of bank transfers, falsified deeds, metadata chains, audio transcripts, and a sworn affidavit detailing how my identity had been used to secure access to restricted contracts. Each page was numbered, watermarked, and bound together by the one thing none of them had counted on: a soldier who knew how to build a case from the ground up. The Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Defense didn't move quickly, but when it moved, it thundered. Later that evening, I received the automated reply. Your report has been received and assigned a preliminary review officer. Follow-up will be communicated via a secure channel. I read the line 3 times, letting it settle into the marrow of my bones. No longer whispers and shadows. No longer secrets between family members. This was now federal. Ruth called as I finished scanning the reply. They'll want a full comparison of Claire's known income versus incoming wires. Can you get that from Kayla? I already asked her, I said. She's pulling last year's IRS statements and cross-referencing them with flagged transfers from shell companies. We'll need a subpoena eventually. Let me worry about that, Ruth replied. Just make sure nothing happens to you in the meantime. I smiled grimly. They'd have to try harder than an envelope. But elsewhere, someone was unraveling. I didn't hear it firsthand, but I later found out from Ruth, who heard it from a courthouse clerk who had lunch with someone at the zoning office. Claire had lost it. Apparently, she found out about the federal submission within hours. Whether it was the bank's compliance alert or a panicked call from Brian, she knew I'd gone over their heads, and she didn't take it well. By noon, Claire had shown up at Ruth's office, unannounced, uninvited, and unhinged. You think this is going to help her, she'd hissed. She's going to drag us all down, including her own father. Ruth remained calm, professional. She handed her a copy of the cease and desist letter I had received and said quietly, You might want to advise your counsel that intimidation of a federal whistleblower is a felony. Claire stormed out, but not before throwing one final thread over her shoulder. This isn't over. No, I thought, sitting in my apartment, watching the rain beat against the window. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. That night, Ruth came over with 2 folders, bank summaries from Claire and Brian. The figures were staggering. Claire's declared salary as a nonprofit coordinator didn't come close to matching the deposits. And Brian, there were 3 transfers from a shell account linked to Maritech Solutions, all deposited the same week the forged deed was processed. I stared at the numbers, shaking my head. They moved fast, I said. They had a timeline. This wasn't desperation. It was coordinated. They underestimated you, Ruth said. I looked at her, calm but resolute. They always have. The phone buzzed. A voicemail from an unknown number. I played it on speaker. It was Claire, her voice shaky, uneven. Naomi, please. Let's meet. Just talk. This doesn't have to go further. We're still family. I ended the message before it finished. I'm not here to talk, I told Ruth. I'm here to shut them down. The elevator hummed as it climbed toward the 7th floor of the U.S. Attorney's office in Arlington. I stood beside Ruth, my reflection barely recognizable in the brushed metal doors. Not because of my clothes. I was still in a muted blazer and slacks, but because of what I was carrying inside. For once, it wasn't a uniform or a badge. It was knowledge, leverage, evidence. We were led to a glass-walled conference room by a stone-faced paralegal. Inside, the federal prosecutor was already waiting. Matthew Cruz, assistant U.S. attorney for Northern Virginia. His handshake was firm, but not performative. His eyes didn't flinch when Ruth set down the bulging folder of documents. Miss Hale, he began. Thank you for coming. We review the materials submitted to the Office of the Inspector General. We believe a formal criminal inquiry is warranted. Hearing it aloud gave the whole thing new weight. The forged deeds, the bank transfers, the surveillance footage, and most damning of all, the fraudulent contracts tied to Raven Holdings and Maritech, both traced back to Claire and Brian. I spoke carefully, controlling my breathing like I had in hundreds of interrogations before. They used my discharge credentials to gain access to federal bidding processes. They used my grandfather's house as a discreet waypoint. They never imagined someone would come back to check. Ruth added, We also have preliminary confirmation that Mr. Hale, Naomi's father, served as a proxy on property transfers to mask conflict of interest. That may qualify as conspiracy to defraud. Cruz opened a leather binder. Based on what we've received, we're issuing federal subpoenas for Brian Whitmore, Claire Hale, and William Hale. They will be compelled to testify in a closed preliminary hearing 2 weeks from today. I leaned forward. I want to be anonymous until then. No public disclosures. No leaks to media or local authorities. They've already tried to intimidate me. We'll flag your testimony under protective status, Cruz said. But be advised, once formal charges are filed, anonymity isn't guaranteed. That's fine, I said. By then, I want to be the one speaking out loud. Outside the window, I could see the Potomac, placid and gray. The calm before the current shifted. That afternoon, I waited with Ruth in the lobby of Claire's nonprofit foundation. The subpoena was to be delivered in person. She didn't know we were watching from across the atrium. Claire walked in, high heels and a too bright smile for the receptionist. It took less than a minute. A U.S. Marshal stepped forward, handed her the envelope, and spoke the words we'd waited weeks to hear. You are being summoned under federal subpoena for alleged participation in conspiracy and fraud. The receptionist gasped. Phones froze in mid-scroll. Claire's smile shattered. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. She turned, eyes scanning the lobby. And for a moment, I thought she saw me, but she didn't. I was behind mirrored glass, watching the empire she built on silence begin to crumble. Later that night, Ruth and I stepped out of the federal building after finalizing the paperwork. The air smelled like the first hint of spring, wet concrete, pollen, tension. I've rarely seen a case turn this fast, Ruth murmured. They know they're exposed. Good, I said. They should be afraid. As we reached the parking garage, I slowed. A black sedan sat idling across the street. Windows tinted, engine running. No license plate visible from this angle. Just long enough to be watching. Just long enough to make sure I noticed. The walls they stole from me were now silent witnesses in court. And the woman they called unstable? She was the one testifying. The courtroom was cold. White lights overhead. Pale walls. Steel benches that hummed when I shifted. I stood behind the witness table, right hand raised, the oath catching in my throat like sandpaper. I didn't shake, but I remember the day my grandfather handed me the keys to the house. The day I came home to find my name erased. The night I heard my father's voice, masked in shadows, plotting behind my back. Now I stood here, not as the daughter who had been disowned, but as a decorated officer, a cybersecurity analyst with clearance history, and most importantly, a plaintiff backed by federal prosecution. The prosecutor began. Miss Hale, please describe what was done to your property. I met his eyes, then shifted toward the bench. They forged my signature on a deed transferring ancestral property. They altered bank records, funneled money through offshore accounts disguised as non-profit funds, and they used my military discharge credentials to apply for federal contracts they had no legal access to. He nodded. Did you consent to any of this? No. The evidence came in waves. A photograph of the deed with a falsified signature. A screen capture of the IP logs Kayla had tracked to Claire's home network. Audio files with my father's voice, subdued but distinct, arranging late-night deliveries to the warehouse behind my house. And then came the financial documents. Bank transfers from Raven Holdings to shell corporations in Claire's name. Another to Brian's Maritech Solutions. Amounts too large for helping the family. Claire sat stone still, face pale beneath her mascara. Brian leaned forward, jaw clenched, whispering urgently to his lawyer. My father didn't even blink. The defense tried. Brian's attorney objected to the admissibility of surveillance footage not obtained through legal means. Ruth stepped in with a declaration signed by our digital expert. Data chain of custody intact. No tampering. Timestamped. Claire's lawyer tried to spin the narrative. My client acted under the impression that Naomi had relinquished claim to the house. This was a familial misunderstanding. I leaned into the microphone. A misunderstanding doesn't involve stolen credentials, falsified signatures, and the use of federal infrastructure for illegal bidding. The final nail came when the prosecutor held up a physical copy of the procurement contract, complete with my old clearance codes and Brian's name on the submission. He looked like he might bolt. Then the prosecutor turned to my father. Mr. Hale, can you explain the source of the $320,000 you transferred to Maritech Solutions? Silence. He looked toward the floor, then toward Claire, then finally toward me. But I wasn't his daughter now. I was a federal witness with everything to lose and nothing left to protect. The prosecutor's voice was calm. In your opinion, Ms. Hale, does this constitute a deliberate conspiracy? Yes, I said. It wasn't just about a house. It was about power, control, and silencing someone they thought wouldn't come back. He nodded once, then turned to the judge. In closing, Your Honor, the defendants did not simply defraud a veteran. They undermined the integrity of public trust, used federal systems for personal gain, and orchestrated a coordinated attempt to erase accountability. These are not family disputes. These are federal crimes. The courtroom exhaled. Somewhere behind me, pens scribbled on notepads. Reporters, finally allowed to witness the case. I could hear the clatter of keys, smell the ink from the printed exhibits. I felt every eye turn toward me as the judge recessed the hearing. I stood slowly, stepped down from the platform, and gathered my things. My palms were sweating. I told myself it was adrenaline, not grief. Outside, I moved through the crowd of photographers and questions, ignoring the flashes. Ruth stayed close. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Not until I reached the edge of the sidewalk and saw her. My mother, standing under a tree, hands clasped together like in prayer. Her mouth trembled, but no words came. Her eyes were red. She hadn't said a thing in years. Not one letter, not one call. But now she was here. And I, who had faced war zones and courts alike, found my hand trembling. For the first time in years, every seat in the courtroom was filled. Not to watch me fail, but to hear the truth. The federal courthouse in Alexandria had never looked so full. Rows upon rows of observers sat in tense silence. Some in suits, some in uniform, and others with faces lined by years that mirrored mine. C-SPAN cameras were discreetly tucked in corners. I could feel every lens on me as I stepped to the front. I wore my uniform, not just because I had earned it, but because it was the only armor I had left. My ribbons were real. My service was real. And today, I'd let that truth speak louder than any forged deed or whispered lie. "Ms. Hale," the prosecutor began, "you may proceed with your full testimony for the court." I took a breath that felt like peeling off rusted chains. "My name is Naomi Hale. I served over 20 years in the Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Task Force. I held top-level clearance. I came home with honor, expecting only silence. Instead, I was erased. A murmur swept through the benches. My name was removed from my family's will, from their home, from their story. They forged signatures, laundered money, used my identity to access military contracts. They did it under my father's approval. They did it while calling me unstable, dangerous, irrelevant. Gasps now. The prosecutor played the audio file. Claire's voice crackled through the speakers. She's just an unemployed soldier clinging to medals that don't matter anymore. No one moved. One veteran near the back, a man in a faded navy jacket, shook his head slowly. Another seated beside him reached for her cane, jaw clenched. I turned to the judge, but I was speaking to everyone. We don't wear these uniforms for medals. We wear them because we believe in something larger than ourselves. I did not serve to return home and be treated like a threat or a burden. Or a lie. Someone clapped, just once. But then others joined. Not everyone. Not the ones in tailored blazers who probably golfed with people like Brian. But enough. Enough to know I wasn't alone anymore. The judge lifted his hand. Silence resumed. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Claire sat frozen. Brian's hand twitched over his tie. My father, stone-faced as always, stared past me. The judge leaned forward. Given the volume and substance of evidence submitted, this court will proceed to a full criminal trial. 6 weeks from today, all motions to dismiss are denied. All current restraining orders and property freezes remain in effect. I exhaled just slightly. It wasn't over, but we were past denial, past doubt. This was real now. Court recessed. I gathered my notes, stepped down from the stand, and caught the eye of that Navy vet on the back bench. He gave me a nod. Just that, but it said everything. I turned toward the hallway. Claire was already reaching into her handbag, fingers moving rapidly across her phone. She didn't look at me, but I saw it. She opened her photo app, scrolled through pictures of family dinners, holidays, and smiling portraits from years past. She tapped one folder, then another. Claire quietly pulled out her phone and deleted every photo of Naomi from the family's social media account. They tried to destroy every trace of me, but I had archived everything, even their crimes. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, the soft hum of my encrypted laptop filling the silence. The external drive rested beside me like a time bomb, one they'd forgotten I even owned. My fingers trembled slightly as I plugged it in. Not from fear, from restraint. File directory loaded. The first folder was dated 7 years ago, labeled Legacy. Inside were scans of contracts, correspondence, grainy surveillance stills from years past. They'd once been my insurance policy. Now they were a loaded gun. Claire must have assumed she had deleted everything. She always had a knack for arrogance, but she hadn't counted on me backing up every drive I ever used. She hadn't counted on military-grade recovery software, and she sure as hell hadn't counted on me coming back with a legal team. I pinged Kayla with a file batch, encrypted, timestamped. Within seconds, she responded, "Got it. Matching metadata, confirms creation from Claire's home IP. This is gold." Next, I called Ruth. "I'm coming in," I said. "And I'm not alone. I'm bringing ghosts." She didn't ask questions. Ruth never did when my voice sounded like that. At the firm's downtown office, Ruth waited in the boardroom, sleeves rolled and eyes sharp. I slid the drive across the table like a chess piece. "Contracts processed through shell vendors," I said, opening the file. "All routed through Maritech and Raven Holdings. Look, this one's a falsified procurement agreement for drone parts. Same model we used to inspect in Kuwait." Ruth's brows furrowed. "You're telling me they reused defense documents to mask fake orders?" "Not just reused, modified, then ran payment cycles through dummy vendors using addresses that matched my father's commercial listings from the 90s. They resurrected his old businesses on paper. Claire managed the routing. Brian did the laundering. My name was used to legitimize it." She opened her laptop and uploaded the files into our official court submission. "I'll add these to the affidavit. The court will want a certified backup." "No problem," I said. pulling out a second drive. I have 3. A notification pinged. Kayla again. For your information, Brian tried to scrub his metadata trail 2 days ago, but he didn't know we had the backup from your last OS scan. He's cooked. I forwarded the message to Ruth, who let out a dry chuckle. Claire and Brian thought deleting files would save them. They underestimated a woman trained to extract secrets from nation-states. I watched her file the documents into the federal repository one by one. Every forged receipt, every IP record, every manipulated digital signature was now admissible. But the moment that made me freeze wasn't technical. It was personal. One folder deep inside the archive, untouched, titled, Hale Family Originals. My heart skipped. I clicked. Among receipts and email logs, a video loaded, grainy but clear. It was my grandfather in his study the day he signed the original will. His voice unshaken. This house goes to Naomi. She's the one who never left. Not in spirit. I trust her to keep it safe. The document was visible on the desk, unaltered, signed, dated. The same one I had shown Ruth weeks ago, but now with a recorded confirmation. We both stared at the screen. That's your hammer, Ruth whispered. I nodded. Time to swing. Just then my phone buzzed. An anonymous number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the subject line. Internal email. Forwarded copy. I opened it. From undisclosed@revankia.net to redacted. Subject urgent message. If Naomi opens her mouth, we don't just lose assets. We lose our freedom. We need to move fast before the hearing date changes. I passed the phone to Ruth. They're panicking, she said, reading. Let them, I replied. Her phone buzzed next. She answered and listened in silence, eyes narrowing. Understood. We'll prepare accordingly. She hung up, looked me dead in the eyes. That was the federal prosecutor's office. Based on this new evidence and risk of flight, they're pushing the trial forward. I leaned back in the chair, adrenaline humming through my limbs. It was happening. The timeline was collapsing in our favor. The cliff edge we'd been dancing along had just shifted beneath their feet. And this time, I wasn't the one about to fall. They had their secrets, their manipulation, and each other. But I had something more dangerous, the truth under oath. Brian Hale walked out of the Raven Holdings headquarters for the last time under a swarm of flashing cameras. The press release had gone out just minutes before. Due to pending federal investigation, Brian Hale has been placed on indefinite leave, pending internal review. The company had cut him loose the second the indictment list leaked to media contacts. No one wanted their name tied to federal conspiracy. At the same time, Claire Hale was across town in a lawyer's office that smelled like old mahogany and desperation. She was alone. Her posture wasn't sharp anymore. Her voice cracked as she tried to frame her statement. I was manipulated by my husband and father, she told the assistant district attorney. I didn't know the details. I was following family orders. It was a gamble, and a cheap one. But desperation makes people throw each other under the bus faster than the ink dries on a subpoena. Back at Ruth's office, I watched footage unfold on the news. Brian's stoic face surrounded by bodyguards. Claire ducking under her coat at the courthouse steps. But the one that made me pause was the image of my father. He was standing inside what used to be the family home, his hands trembling as he shouted into a phone. The video, taken by a local reporter, captured him slamming his fist against a glass coffee table, shattering it into jagged pieces. The clip played over and over. Family patriarch loses composure amid scandal, the Chiron read. Public narratives turning, Ruth said, not looking up from her stack of documents. I know, I murmured. They're unraveling faster than I expected. My phone buzzed. A courier message. I opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter. The stationery was delicate, slightly yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was careful and old-fashioned. Naomi, I've watched from the sidelines far too long. Your mother and I were close once. I knew about the house. I knew your name was on the will. I also knew she let them change it. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Margaret Lewis. Margaret had been a friend of my mother's, one of those women who hosted brunches, who always asked how I was doing, but never really listened. And yet now, here she was, reaching across years of silence to say, I knew, and I stayed quiet, and I regret it. I folded the letter slowly. Truth has a strange way of surfacing, I said, placing it beside the growing pile of evidence. That evening, the federal courthouse held another closed session. This time, the judge was ready. The court finds sufficient cause to freeze the financial assets of Claire Hale, Brian Hale, and Henry Hale, she announced. Effective immediately, these accounts will be placed under investigative seal and subject to audit. The moment was sterile, procedural, and devastating. Everything they had built by fraud was now under scrutiny. Their liquidity evaporated in minutes. Homes, cars, stocks, college funds gone. The empire built on my silence was collapsing, brick by forged brick. I stood outside the courthouse steps as the wind picked up. The sky was bruised with the color of approaching night. Reporters crowded near the gates. Some called my name, but I ignored them. Then my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. Naomi. The voice shaky, unsure, familiar. My mother. She said nothing else, just my name. And in that brief silence, I could hear everything she didn't say. Regret, fear, maybe even guilt. I held the phone to my ear and didn't speak. Let her sit in it. Let her feel for the first time what it was like to be alone on the other end. He begged me outside the courtroom. Please, Naomi, don't ruin us. I looked him in the eyes and said, You did that on your own. It was late afternoon, the lights stretching long shadows across the courthouse steps. I'd just finished reviewing the final briefing with Ruth when I saw him standing near the marble column by the hallway, not in a suit, but in his old wool coat. His tie was crooked. His face was pale. He looked smaller than I remembered. I didn't slow my steps until I was nearly past him, but then he spoke, low and hoarse. Naomi. I turned. Mr. Hale, I said flatly. His face crumpled at the title. Don't do that. I'm your father. You lost the right to that word the day you erased me from everything. I said. He stepped closer. I didn't know it would go this far. You didn't care, I corrected. That's what you mean. I made mistakes, he said, hands open, pleading. We were trying to protect the family. By forging documents, stealing my house, laundering money through a company that used my clearance. That's protection. He looked away, jaw tight. I was scared. No, you were proud, I said. You couldn't stand that your daughter came back in uniform instead of a dress, holding medals instead of wedding invitations. His eyes flickered. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. What wasn't fair was you not coming to my retirement ceremony. Remember that? When I called and invited you. He stayed silent. You said, and I quote, That's not something to brag about. It's just a job. 25 years of service, and you reduced it to nothing. He swallowed hard. Claire was going through a rough time then. Claire was always going through something, I said, bitterness creeping in. And you always had time for her, for Brian, but never for me. He didn't argue. Instead, he lowered his voice. You've already humiliated us. The indictments, the hearings, the news coverage. Please, Naomi, don't let it go further. I laughed, short and sharp. You think this is about humiliation? It'll destroy our name, he whispered. Asterisk our asterisk name. I echoed. You erased my name from the will, from the family records, from everything. I panicked, he said. I let Claire talk me into things. You signed? You knew. He didn't answer. After a moment, he reached out his hand, trembling as it hovered near mine. I know I failed, but I'm still your father. I stared at that hand. For a second, I saw the man who once held mine on the walk to school, who once helped fix my bike chain. But then I remember the empty seat at my officer commissioning, the silence after my deployments, the house I came home to, only to be thrown out like a stranger. I didn't take his hand. Behind him, I saw her, my mother, standing near the edge of the colonnade. She hadn't approached, but she watched. Her arms were folded tight across her chest, her eyes rimmed red. I don't hate you, I told him, but I can't forgive you on behalf of justice. He flinched. And justice, I said, is coming, whether you ask for mercy or not. He turned away then, shoulders hunched. I walked past him without looking back. As I reached the bottom of the steps, I felt someone beside me. My mother. She didn't meet my eyes, but her voice broke the silence. If I had made different choices, maybe you wouldn't hurt this much. I looked at her for a long second, then kept walking. They took everything, but I walked out of that courtroom with my name, my honor and justice on my side. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. For all the weeks of hearings, motions, and cross-examinations, today felt still, final. There was no shouting, no dramatics, just the gavel, the judge's even tone, and the weight of consequences being carved into history. I sat beside Ruth, our shoulders barely touching. Across the aisle were Claire, Brian, and my father, lined up in a row like defendants in a photo I never imagined I'd see. Claire's face was pale, jaw locked. Brian's eyes flicked around nervously. My father looked old, not from age, but from erosion. The slow crumbling of arrogance under truth. The judge's voice echoed. Claire Hale, 6 years in federal custody. Brian Whitmore, 8 years. Edward Hale, 10 years with no parole. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. Then silence again. No cheers, no applause. I didn't smile. I just nodded once to Ruth, who closed her folder and placed a hand gently over mine. It wasn't victory, I felt. It was completion. Outside, the press swarmed, but the first people I saw were the veterans, men and women in faded uniforms, some leaning on canes or wheelchairs, others with ribbons pinned proudly to worn jackets. One of them, a man with a prosthetic leg and soft, steady eyes, stepped forward and extended his hand. "Colonel Hale," he said. I shook it. "We're not forgotten," I told him. He nodded. "Not while people like you are still standing." Flashes from the cameras lit up my peripheral vision. A reporter shouted, "Do you hate them now?" After all this, I looked toward the sky for a moment. The sun had broken through the morning fog. Warmth touched my face. "I don't carry hate," I said. "I carry clarity." I walked down the steps slowly, Ruth beside me. Isaac was waiting by the car, and Kayla sent a thumbs up from across the lot. They were more than allies. They were the family I chose. I didn't return to the house. I didn't need it anymore. What I wanted was never brick and wood. It was the right to belong to my own story. Weeks later, I stood inside the Defense Service Library, staring at the wall of dedication. It was made of dark granite, etched with names of those who had contributed to national security in extraordinary ways. I had walked past it once as a young cadet, whispering promises under my breath. Back then, it felt like a monument for others, untouchable. But now there it was. Colonel Naomi Hale, Cyber Command, OIA, 2000 to 2023. Valor. Service. Integrity. No family portrait ever meant as much. No inheritance ever compared. As I stood there, my reflection blurry in the polished stone, I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't cry. I stood tall. They stripped her of her name, her home, and her dignity, believing no one would ever believe a so-called broken soldier. But in the end, it was their lies that unraveled under oath, and her truth that stood unshaken. Justice doesn't arrive in noise or vengeance. It arrives in the quiet courage of someone who refuses to stay erased. So, I've told you my story. A long, winding road to justice. But I have to ask, if you were in my shoes, faced with that level of betrayal from your own family, what would you have done? Would you have fought as hard, or sought a different path? Let me know in the comments below, because I truly want to hear your thoughts.